Good evening, citizens and council and staff. I call the City Council meeting of May 16, 2017 to order. Clerk Hefner, please call the roll.
Mayor Beckman.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brinkman.
Here.
Councilmember Cernanik.
Present.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Cole.
Here.
Councilmember Hopping. Councilmember Valdez.
Present.
Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There's Bill.
We have an agenda for this evening, and it's been posted and presented to council. I do have a change or addition. Do any other members have any changes or
I have a
additions?
change.
Yes.
I would ask that we wait to approve the agenda until after public comment. It's been brought to my attention, a citizen would like to make a comment about his comments from the last meeting that are recorded in the minutes. They're incorrect. He'd like to correct that. And I think it would be better having the citizen make that correction. So if we can hear from the citizen during public comments and then bring the agenda approval again up after public comments to make that amendment if necessary. Or if you want to go way out of bounds and have him come down now.
Well, what if he comes down during the public comment and we don't approve the minutes until after he speaks? So we can incorporate his.
That's what I think I just said.
Yeah, so the minutes will be,
So it wouldn't change.
so we'll do it in consent agenda number 5, and we'll have him speak
Well,
in
we
number
would
4.
move, yeah, because we would move the approval of the agenda down to within public comment.
Oh, because, okay, well,
But if he's,
I think he's okay if he comes forward during public comment,
yeah,
and then we have 5B as the minutes.
because
and
it's
we would-
already after him speaking anyway.
Approval of agendas. Tonight's.
I'm sorry.
That would work. Okay, I got you.
Okay.
Yes, I know what
But you
wanna
could
do.
pull the minutes off a consent agenda.
Yeah, that's what we may do. We may do to correct it.
No, I don't think I'm going to do that.
Behave over there.
We had enough fun with that.
Okay, the one item I want to let everyone know in advance is we'll be rescheduling one of the items that's on public hearing tonight, and that's item D, which is the commercial mobile radio service and city's regulations about wireless communications. We're not going to be going forward with that. Normally, we would wait and get to that point, but there may be some people that are waiting because it's on the agenda, and it'll take a council vote to do that, but I believe that, and, we'll see how it goes, but I believe we have a reason why we want to continue it to June 6th. So just advance warning in case anybody's here for that. And they're welcome to stay, and, it's not over till it's over. But the other, make everyone aware of is when we complete the regular meeting here, we're going to move to the community room for a study session regarding the fire dispatch services. So we'll call an end to the regular meeting and then go to a study session. With that, we'll move to public comments. Public comments are an opportunity for anyone to express opinions or ask questions that are not part of the public hearings. And we do have several public hearings tonight, so please, if you want to make a comment in regards to one of the items on the public hearing, please don't do it now because it doesn't become part of the official record for the public hearing. So you want to wait till that time. An immediate response should not be expected. We ask that anyone who would like to speak during public comment sign in on the green sheet. If you've missed doing this, I'll make sure I give you a chance to speak, but it's very helpful if you sign up in advance. We expect the comments to be civil. Disrespectful behavior will not be tolerated, and there is a 3-minute time limit. We have several people who've signed up. The first is Kent Begley.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. My name is Kent Bagley. I live at 1467 West Briarwood Avenue and have lived there for 24 years now. The reason for my comments today relates to your process of hiring a new city manager. I think it is extremely flawed and I speak to every one of you that are sitting on the dais tonight. This is an extremely important decision on the part of the City Council and the city as a whole. And you may ask, and this is not personal, this is not about a person, this is about a flawed process, which I consider to be extremely flawed. And the thing that I want to say is, you will probably ask, so what, Mr. Bagley, what reason are you here and what expertise do you have? I served 8 years on the RTD board, and all of those years I served on the General Manager Oversight and Performance Management Committee, and 5 of those years I served as the chair. And any process that we went through and that you should go through has to be a rigorous process. Otherwise, it jeopardizes not only the person that you may appoint to serve as the Chief Executive Officer, but it also jeopardizes you as a council and the city. And I would indicate to you that the major issues that we continued to look at on the RTD board, on the committee of 5 people that I chaired, was to work on behalf of the entire board and the entire district, 3 million people. We wanted to make sure that we had an extremely transparent process. We wanted to assume that we did rigorous benchmarking of salaries and benefit packages. We wanted it to be an open process where we had not only citizen involvement, but key people in the community. I'm talking about high-level key individuals. And this process is so important for this city at this time that it can't be left to some whimsical methodology to appoint somebody who's a good person. You need to do the right job in doing this. It's absolutely critical, not only for you, but for the city, and you don't want to jeopardize him in the position and what happens in the future. So I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to make some comments, and I wish you well in your decisions. Every one of you. Take it seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Greg Renke?
Can I pass this up to you real quick? That's even better.
Stay away, stay away.
Stay away. Greg, do I need to say who I am and all that?
Yes, please.
Greg Renke, 5663 South Prince Street. I own Renke Brothers. I'm here. We had a merchant meeting the first Wednesday of this month, and we had approximately 50 merchants that attended. Councilman Hopping was there. And they're very frustrated right now with the signage, with the sandwich boards being taken away. I walked the district today just to get this down. I didn't include any businesses that were empty, like Grandpa's Attic or any of the places that are vacant. It's just businesses that are there, and you see how many businesses we have in that little area. 142. You have 16 wayfinding signs, and I was on the wayfinding committee about 14 years ago. One of the things they all argued was that nobody can find us. For instance, does anybody here know where the traditional African braiding and grooming salon is? Besides Bill, because I told him?
You can tell.
Anybody? They're on Main Street. They're right next to the melting pot. They're where the old bail bonds building is. Okay? Nobody knows where they are. Anyway, you put up all these signs, and only 6 merchants can be on each one, so a total of 48 merchants can be on there. That means 94 merchants can't be on it. What's interesting is, on Main Street, no merchant can be on the wayfinding signs because they're on Main Street, although Town Hall Art Center's on 3 of them. The city owns the building and they lease it to the Town Hall Art Center. It's good to be king. Anyway, the sandwich boards are a tool of our trade. It's something that's been around for thousands of years. And one of the interesting things, when I came down here in 1999 and bought the building, It looks like it does now. There's not a lot of charm and not a lot of character because everything's been taken off the sidewalks. Right now, you're right. You can walk down the sidewalks. One of the excuses they said, well, someone could trip and sue the city. In the last 15 years that we worked on wayfinding signs, did you get sued? And by the way, I'm 58. I've lived down here all my life. Ever been sued? And they've been there ever since I was a kid. What I'm asking you to do is allow the merchants to use the sandwich boards. It adds character and charm to the neighborhood. It's not so cleansed up. And actually, they've done a great job with those. But you can see that the wayfinding signs and the way they are right now, they don't work. They don't help everybody. In fact, I found out in order to change them, it takes somebody from Louisville to come down with a special tool to change them. I'll do it for $10. Give me the tool. So I'm trying to make it within this minute. I want to just point out something. Kaleidoscope, when they first put up the wayfinding signs, Kaleidoscope was on there. There was an arrow pointing the wrong way. It took a week and a half for that arrow to get pointed the right way. The interesting thing, can I keep going? It's after my turn.
Your time is up.
Nope, okay.
I got it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your help.
Sudie Floyd. Do I have that name correct? Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Sudie Floyd. I have Outnumbered Gallery at 5654 South Prince Street, and I too am here to talk about the signs. To continue on what Greg was going to say, Kaleidoscope had already closed their doors by the time you put the signs up, which we had been promised for months and months and months. Once a sign was put in, it was pointing the wrong direction. They changed it. She was already gone when it was even put up. So the process didn't work. And I guess I'm frustrated because when I moved in August of 2014, I was told about this great wayfinding that we'd spent lots of time, lots of hours, lots of money. I didn't see any benefit until right before Christmas, so we were working on this. They came, they weren't put in right, and then as you can see with Greg's statistics, we're not even covering all the merchants. And these are struggling merchants who want to let people know that they're here, what they have to offer, and the charm that they have about their business. And I don't think any of that was taken into consideration when we addressed what we were trying to do. I've heard the word tacky, I've heard the word sloppy, I've heard several not nice things about our sandwich board signs, but it is part of who a small town, historical downtown is about. And what I did notice, I come in, I live in Denver now, and I drive in on Santa Fe. It says downtown Littleton. We've completely taken the historic way. I don't know why that decision was made, but it has nothing about merchants, shopping, dining, plays, anything. It doesn't direct people to what we actually offer. So what were we trying to do with our wayfinding signs? I'm not really sure because they don't tell anybody flying down Santa Fe, coming down Bellevue, any of the directions, coming up Bowles, that we have a remarkable little town here. And you're going to continue to lose merchants if you don't let people know we're here. We want to fight off big box. Well, big box survives because they can do those things. Small family businesses can't survive when you don't allow them to tell people what they have in their stores. And there can be codes set that you have something nice and not flimsy that falls down. Maybe you have where it's supposed to be, but I don't think any of those things were taken into consideration when this group of people met to decide what was supposed to happen. I've had customers come in my store and say, why did they take them away? That was part of the charm of downtown Littleton. And all I can say was 7 people on a board said they didn't like them. That's the answer I have. I don't know if that's a very good answer. So I think we need to look into this and see what we're actually doing for our merchants.
Thank you,
So
Cindy.
I think my time's up.
Don Burns?
Good evening, Council. Don Bruns, District 4. Tonight's a night to say something nice. Several weeks ago, months, I learned that the Highline Canal Conservancy was working to try to preserve the Highline Canal. And in some of their meetings, I was discouraged to find out that, matter of factly, they said their water really won't run here anymore because it's too valuable for other things. So Saturday, hiking along the canal, I found out there's water and it's running. And I thought, fantastic. So I called South Suburban while I was waiting for the return call. I Googled and I found out that Denver Water's TAP staff posted an article called "The Free Flowing Highline Canal." Made me smile. And found out that, in fact, water hasn't run in the Highline Canal since May of 15. So Andy Jennings, the Parks and Open Space Director with South Suburban, told me that I should talk with Brandon Ransom with Denver Water, and I did. And he said, well, normally we wouldn't turn this on until the full runoff season has started, but we decided we would open it up. And I gotta say, it was superb. I said, who made that decision? He said, I'm not sure, but it wasn't me. He said, I do encourage them, but he said, well, there's folks that are higher up than me. And I said, please pass on my encouragement and my thanks. And so if the council or city staff thought it appropriate, I think it would be great to send words of thanks to Denver Water. What was fascinating is that the whole ecosystem had changed. Birds were singing. It wasn't just my imagination. I stepped aside to look. There was even a duck. And I learned from Andy Jennings that they're actually now able to use this to top off Kettering Lake and supplement what the well is doing. So I've been discouraged sometimes because it seems that sometimes building and growth supersedes care and stewardship of our natural resources. And here's a time when Denver Water actually did this. Surprised me. It was great. So they're hoping to send more water later. I hope it works. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Kyle Schlachter.
Good evening, Council. Kyle Schlachter, District 2. I only about 30 minutes ago sent you guys an email. I have the issue with the minutes. These are great minutes, fabulous minutes. I love reading the minutes. But it got my opinion on the subject of the city manager position a little wrong. I am not in favor of moving forward with Mark Ralph in this process as it stands. I think I have concerns with how council is moving forward with this. And I am concerned and alarmed that you are progressing in a way that appointing someone who is afraid to go through a public competitive process. He backed out because he did not want to face the scrutiny of a public process. And if that's his stance on it, I don't support that. This kind of frankly screams of the cronyism that Mr. Clark has rallied against for years. If the table were turned and there was a public process and Mr. Ralph were to emerge, which frankly he probably would, but we don't know that without going through the process. It seems like I'm too late, but I want to have one last plea to correct the minutes to show that I am not in favor, to show that people are not in favor of this. And one last plea for common sense and just basic competency as a government. You have a whole bunch of scouts sitting out here. Show them that government works. Show them that you listen, and show them that you don't just push things through because they're easy. Think about it and go back and open up the process and let the public have a say. Let us see the other people's abilities, and let's prove that Mr. Ralph is the right person for the job, rather than just hand it to him under the table. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. That completes the list of people that I had signed up. Is there anyone in the audience that didn't get signed up that would like to speak? Please.
I'm Carol Brezak. Didn't know that Greg was going to come down and talk about sandwich boards, but I remember when this decision was being deliberated a few years back, and it was right after my husband and I had taken a road trip to Texas, and we decided we were not going to use the highway. We were going to go through the back roads and through the small towns. And the experience that we had was a lot of fun, but I think what really struck me with the conversation I heard in this room, juxtaposed to the trip we had just taken, when we went through these little towns, there were sandwich boards. So we knew what to expect, and we would, dart in one little store for a little bit and, meander down the street to the next one. So I do think it adds to the charm and the quaintness of a community, and they work. They pulled us in off the road long enough to stop and go and spend a little bit of money or have a glass of wine or have lunch within the community. I'd like to see them back. I don't think they were ever a hazard on the sidewalk. So hope that you consider reestablishing some kind of requirements that the merchants can meet that will allow them to use sandwich boards. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Please.
I'm Pam Chadbourne. I live in District 1. I did not check the minutes, but considering I spoke as Kyle did last time, asking for the city manager hiring process to complete rather than be short-circuited, I want to make sure that I'm not shown as, supporting Mark Ralph immediately or something like that. What I support is a informed and collaborative process that builds consensus. And so I'll mention it again that data, I think, is good. Getting information from the other candidates is excellent. Everybody can talk about it, and the discussion builds consensus. And I'm not sure why we wouldn't do that process for that reason. To somehow focus on who the city manager should be immediately ignores the benefit of the process. So let me make sure that the minutes also reflect that I didn't speak for or against Mark Rolfe as city manager. I spoke for completing the process. I wanted to mention something about sandwich boards. I'd like us to think outside the box. Maybe there's something else besides sandwich boards, kind of like the wayfinding thing. Well, we have to take this approach. I was thinking of maybe banners or flags that could be reprinted when merchants came or went. They would hang above the sidewalk, with like 2 bars or something like that, and they could point down the streets. They could point on Main Street. I don't know exactly what that is, but there might be alternatives to sandwich boards that don't have the sidewalk issue, and also have some kind of really attractive appeal to passersby and drivers. So think outside the box and let's not just kind of do sandwich boards because we've done them in the past or because some people like them. I don't. I don't. And probably some other people don't either. Finally, about the dispatcher, I'm not informed on this issue. However, from what I read, I'm not sure why we just don't pay the dispatchers more. It sure seemed like, well, let's talk about, how much they're paid, and so suddenly we have to move them to get paid more. No, let's just pay them more. Dispatchers are valuable. That's been proven in national news over the years. Why don't we just pay them a competitive rate? Thanks very much.
Thank you. That completes anyone that I saw who would like to speak. Okay. Brings us to item 5 on the agenda. It's the consent agenda items. There are 2 of them. Consent agenda items may be adopted by a single motion. All ordinances must be read by title prior to a vote on the motion, and any consent agenda item may be removed at the request of a council member. And just a point of process, with the information that one of the speakers had, will the clerk make a change, or does it require us to pull the item to direct you to do that, or?
You should pull the item.
Okay. 5A is ID 17-150. It's a lease agreement for Romancing the Bean to operate a concession at the historic Denver and Rio Grande Depot.
Pull, please.
Consent Agenda 5B is ID 17-140. That's the approval of the May 2nd, 2017 regular meeting minutes.
Pull.
That's 3 people.
With that, we don't have a consent agenda.
We have consent on
So let's talk about the items that were removed from the consent agenda. Item number 5A was pulled by Councilmember Valdez.
Thank you. I realize the staff needs more time to look at this, and I guess we have about 6 months. We're going to have about 6 months.
Jerry, I can't hear you. Could you put your mic a little close? No, lift it up. So it's, yeah, thank you.
Can you hear me? Sorry. Anyway, so if you would, please take a look at a couple items I want to make sure you do look to. Would be, was it item number 5 of the lease agreement, A, the 1% per month? That is rather low. I'd like you to take a look at that, please. Also, if you would, under 7C, there's an interesting sentence where it refers to him. The last sentence there, by him under the terms of the agreement. Also, utilities, I'd like you to take a look at utilities as to why the city should continue paying utilities. Also, the hours of operation, it was interesting that it says the hours of operation, the city may alter the hours upon written approval from the concessionaire. So we say we want to do something, but they're still approving them. So again, I'm not sure that's what we really want in there. I believe that is it. Just for things you to take a look at for me. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Any additional comments on consent agenda 5A, please?
Mayor Beckman? Oh, I'm sorry.
Debbie Scott.
I would just like to hear from staff as to why it will take 6 months to do this. Is there a reason we didn't perhaps select 2 months or 3 months? I mean, how much time? I understand it's fitting into a list of other things that need to be done, but things need to start getting done.
Yeah, I think from staff's perspective, quite honestly, I'm sure we could probably accommodate sooner than 6 months, but I think it pushed it out to the end of the year. You know, with the transition of staff that we have in the city manager's office specifically, I think it was just adding a little time just to make sure. But it sure is our intent to try to deal with this sooner rather than later. It is an unusual agreement. There's lots of interesting provisions. Councilmember Valdez kind of pointed out a few things like the city paying for the utilities and the like. And it's just one of those that's going to take a little bit of time, kind of working through the details and with the current occupant just to make sure that we're kind of addressing, I guess, ultimately their concerns as well.
I would suggest then that you go back and review when we last renewed the lease, because I recall we had quite a discussion at council regarding that. They were a bit in the arrears, and so we were making adjustments with that, and I think that there were some other decisions made about looking forward and in the future. So if you can go back to that particular meeting and take a look at what was said, that would help.
Be happy to.
Bill, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just think we need to bear in mind, I believe, if I'm right, when Romancing the Bean initially went in there, we needed a tenant for that facility. And there's benefit to the city to have that as a gateway into the downtown area. So I think we need to consider that when we look at some of the things like interest and whatever else. But it obviously needs to make sense, but I think we need to bear that in mind as well.
Yeah, my memory was that it was difficult to have a viable business in that particular location because of the limited access to it. And the clientele is basically people that come on and off the light rail. So there is a bit of history to it. including how often the building was moved and how it finally ended up there.
So I did have a question about how the rental fee was determined. I mean, a lot of times one compares similar facilities and what the rent goes for those. It's a great place, and I'm glad that it's there, but still the understanding how that the fee is determined. I don't want to gouge anybody, but I do want to understand the process of arriving at that.
It's like Geneva Village.
Doug made me think of something. I think it would probably be of value, too, to look at similar operations. For example, Nixon's is down there at the Hudson Gardens Cafe right off the trail, which is also fairly, it's accessible by bike and walkers and dog walkers. So I think that they're running a pretty successful model down there, and there's other ones over the years that have cropped up based on the way that, the different ways that the demographic is using those types of kiosks type of things. So I think maybe looking at some models for that and making sure that we are getting the highest value.
Happy to.
Yes. Mark, on this one, it just looks like what you're looking for in this motion is some additional time, that between now and the end of June may be a little too quick. 6 months, at least to some of us, seems like a long time. Is there something in the middle?
Well, certainly from staff's perspective, 4 months, I think is fine. I think the occupant agreed the 6 months was fine with them as well, but, I'm fine with 4 months if the council wants to shorten it up. No problem with me.
I'm not sure that we need a motion. I think we just have an agreement, or would you
need
prefer to have a
motion
motion
to
to
approve
change?
the lease, because the lease is expired, has it not?
Well, it expires the end of June. But this is given as a 12-month lease, or 6-month
To
lease.
extend
Yeah,
it. and we
so-
change it.
So do you want to have them come back with us, maybe in June 6th with a different date, and we relook it?
I'm okay renewing this for 6 months, and if you get the lease earlier and you bring it back to us, then we can spend the appropriate amount of time going over it in detail.
Council, are you okay with that approach, rather than,
So we need a motion, right?
so we still need the motion
So I
on the
would-
original lease?
I would move to postpone this item for 3 months so that we can get more information, or do I have to have a date certain?
Do you not like the motion that staff has written?
But-
To approve the lease agreement for 6 months, which is what we just,
Well, I was shortening it and wanting more information, so you think 6 months? I'm
that's what
sorry
they,
to be
is
having
that not what you would
dialogue
come
here,
back to
but
us with in 6 months?
Well, I think that's the intent of staff was to come back much sooner than 6 months, simply because that would be the termination of the lease. So we have to come back sooner than that. I think it is a very unusual lease, and I appreciate all the council's comments. Quite honestly, that's kind of staff's, kind of read it as well. So we do need some time to kind of sort through the issues and some examples. Appreciate that. So, if staff's intent was to extend the 6 months, but certainly come back in less time than that.
If you delay it, if you postpone it, then it goes for a period of time without a lease.
Yes.
The lease
Yeah, the lease.
expires,
Yeah.
end of June? 1st of
Yes.
June? So,
okay, I'll yield and let you phrase the motion.
Okay.
Just read the
Jerry has a
motion.
motion.
I'd like to make a motion. I move to approve the lease agreement for a 6-month term for Romancing the Bean to operate a concession at the historic Denver and Rio Grande Depot.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. Just one additional comment is, I think part of our discussion answers probably one of the questions staff had, and that is this a sacred cow that can't be touched? Or is this something that modifications can occur? And I think you have a sense of our issue. So that probably got answered. So we have a motion and a second. Are you ready to vote?
Yes.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
This brings us to Agenda Item 5B, which was the approval of the minutes and was pulled by Mayor Pro Tem
Brinkman.
Yep. Not going to let me forget it. I move to approve the minutes for the May 2nd, 2017 regular meeting of the Littleton City Council, amending Kyle Schlechter's public comment to reflect his non-support for Mark Ralph as city manager.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Ready to vote?
So you'd be putting non in favor of in? Here?
I said reflecting his non.
Can I offer
so
a friendly on
that can-
some of this, which is
Can be phrased how the clerk wants to phrase it.
Right.
It was stating intent.
Kyle has sent an email with what his position was, which is opposed to short-circuiting the process and showing some favoritism in short-circuiting that. And so there was, if you read his email, there's actually two thoughts. It's not just he's opposed to Mark, it's he's opposed to short-circuiting the process and dealing with that. And what I would do is reference Kyle's email.
Council,
So is this a motion, or-
I withdraw my motion.
Okay.
Phil, you can
We'll
make
be
it.
looking for a motion.
Okay.
But second, whoever seconded.
I agree.
Okay.
Okay. I move to approve the minutes for the May 2nd, 2017 regular meeting of the Littleton City Council, amending the public comments for Kyle Schlachter to reflect what he has included in the email that he has sent to council earlier today, being May 16, 2017.
Then that's not part of the minutes.
That's not
I'm sorry.
what actually happened in the meeting.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Yes.
I will go back and listen to what's on the video, and that would be what's part of the minutes,
Okay.
not what is in an email that wasn't stated at the meeting. So
Okay.
I'll go back and listen to that section of the meeting again and rephrase whatever is there.
Okay, so
Because we
I
can't go off the
change the
email.
motion then to amend it to correspond to his actual testimony on May 2nd.
I think it goes back to what I
Yeah,
said.
just go back to, let's go back to that.
Yeah. So the point is, in questions, we refer to the video.
Right.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
that's what I amended the motion to.
So
He doesn't have,
You
does
wanna
he have a second or
include-
not?
Not yet?
I'm confused. What are we doing?
We don't have a second.
Just second it.
Just include.
I think Pam's fine because it says she agrees with Kyle.
Yeah, that's-
Phil, do you want to restate your motion?
How about,
I move to approve the minutes after amending it and giving the city clerk the opportunity to listen to Kyle Schlechter's testimony recorded from the meeting on May 2nd, 2017.
Do we have a second?
who?
Do we have a second?
Oh, sorry.
I'll second it.
Okay, any further discussion?
Yeah, I'm going to oppose this. It seems to me the more intelligent thing to do is to just postpone this until the city clerk has a chance to do it and bring something back to us.
Additional discussion?
I would just add that Ms. Chadbourne also indicated she had a change, but her testimony here on the minutes, it says she agrees with Kyle. So if we correct Kyle's, I think that corrects Pam's as well. So.
Additional discussion? We have a motion and a second?
I just want to remind people that the minutes are meant to be what happened that night. Now, if the clerk got one person wrong, that doesn't mean everybody should come down and say, I'd like to make it clearer what I said. It is what indeed happened that night.
Agreed.
So we still have a motion and a second. Additional discussion? Ready to vote?
The vote is 5 in favor with Councilmember Clark and Councilmember Cole voting no. The motion carries 5-2.
Agenda item 6 is ordinances for first reading. We have one item, 6A, ordinance 12-2017, which is an ordinance on first reading to approve access to the Colorado Quarterly Census of Employment Wages Database. This is an item that we've had a study session information on, and unless council has additional questions, I wouldn't be asking staff to come forward with anything unless you have the questions.
Move to approve on first reading the ordinance to approve access to the Colorado Quarterly Census of Employment Wages Database.
Second.
And to schedule a public hearing on the second reading on June 6th, 2017, in the council chamber.
We have a
Second.
motion. We have a motion and a second. Other discussion?
Yeah, who gets a second on that one? Okay.
We have a motion and a second. No
But he
further
did second
discussion.
it before it was read, though.
Yeah.
So I think as a technicality here, it's,
Would you like me to use Mayor Pro Tem Brinkman instead?
I think that would be for clarity, yes.
All right.
Debbie gets it, you get it.
The Boy Scouts decided we're
That motion then will include the second reading of June 6th.
Yes.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
And they say government isn't fun.
This brings us to ordinances on second reading and a public hearing. Agenda item 7A is ordinance 13-2017. It's an ordinance on second reading to amend Title 11 subdivision regulations. This is also one we've had considerable discussion at study sessions. We can have a staff report if you'd like to have that. I'm not seeing a need for that, but we do have a public hearing on this matter. I'd like to open the public hearing at 7:12. Do we have anybody who'd like to come forward and comment on this? And I'm not seeing anyone, so at 7:12 and a few seconds further, we'll close. Oh, do you have a sign up?
I'm sorry.
Did you have a sign up? You had a sign up. Okay, thank you. Pam Chadburn, please.
Good evening, Council. My name is Pam Chadbourne. I live in District 1. I sent a late email about this, and I'm concerned about it. In almost no time to read it, so I figured maybe the paper, while I have my 3 minutes, might help it.
They already have it.
Okay.
I gave it to them
thank
at
you.
the beginning.
Oh, I appreciate that. I thought after 5 p.m. I couldn't, that wasn't fair, so thank you very much for doing that. My concern is that the outcomes of this legislation are poorly understood. We really haven't explored how this would affect districts R3, R5, CA, B2, and other multifamily zone districts, and I'd like to see those examples fleshed out and worked out. That's because we don't know the impact to nearby property owners and neighborhoods, and that is vital. Zoning code is supposed to protect everyone, the interests of a person who wants to change, and also the surrounding property owners and residents and property users and stakeholders. And honestly, we have not seen anything that helps us understand the impact of the words as written. Now, there are plenty of other jurisdictions that have this kind of code and problem, and none of that, as far as what I've seen, has been presented. Instead, this is kind of new language. This sounds good to us, but we don't know how it's going to work out in the real world. Other jurisdictions have done this, and we do know how it's worked out, and I would like that comparison to be brought to us as well. There should be requirements for the impact on adjacent owners that staff can write code that responds to. And finally, at this point in Littleton's development, everything going forward is going to be infill. This is a time to restrict administrative approval and increase notice to the public and input from the public and other affected parties, not decrease it or keep it the same. This kind of seems like we want to keep in gear what we had in the 70s, and that is not appropriate. We do not have the same land availability. The business market is not the same. So trying to keep kind of the same administrative approach is not appropriate now. This is the time. I often don't agree with updating for updating's sake, but this is a good time to update this for administrative. What is in the scope of administrative? Should that be narrowed? And should we have more chance for people who are impacted by the change to know about it and to speak about it? So, Council, I appreciate we need to fix something here, but to me, as I said, it's important but not urgent. And I'd like you to send it back, and for those things that I mentioned, get those things into the language. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Patrick Fitzgerald.
Good evening, Council. Patrick Fitzgerald. I will address problems that I've seen with the proposed ordinance 13-2017 administrative plats. I applaud the provision that once a lot has been created administratively, it cannot be replatted except by a public process. However, I urge that such lots be prominently flagged as being ineligible for future administrative platting or replat. In another section of this proposal, there's very, very muddy language in 11-9-4, criteria for decision, paragraph B. Bad language says, lots that are less than 25% smaller in size of an average lot on the same block face are not eligible for an administrative procedure. It seems that the intent of this is to say administrative approval cannot bless lots which are smaller than 75% of an average lot. However, the bad language says that could be interpreted to say that a proposed lot only 1% smaller than average cannot go administratively. An unwise provision in paragraph C of that same section, 11-9-4, allows creation of a lot which does not abut a street, whereas minor subdivision regulations, major subdivision regulations, and general land design standards, Chapter 6 of the Code, all require any lot to abut a street with a certain minimum frontage. I urge council and staff to clear up the language about lot size relative to existing lots and to eliminate the possibility to administratively create a lot without street frontage. Thank you.
Thank you. That completes the list that I have. Close the public hearing at 7:18. We can have any additional staff information, or if I have a motion in a second, we can have discussion.
I move to approve on second reading ordinance 13, series 2017, to amend Title 11 subdivision regulations.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion.
Yeah, actually, I think that Pat had a good point on one of these, but before we get into that, I believe the purpose, the goal in amending what was called subdivision regulations and now is called, administrative replats, was to try and limit what goes through administrative approval rather than through a public process to those conditions that truly are administrative, and I hesitate to call them minor because that confuses us with minor plat, but it's not really trivial either. So there's small changes that we think, with the conditions put in here, will not affect the look and feel of the neighborhood. And so there's a bit of language in here that's designed to try and achieve that. Is there a chance that there may be a particular administrative approval of a replat that results in something that changes it because we missed something here, I'd say, that, yeah, because that's a chance with every piece of legislation that's passed. I'm reminded of years ago when we had an ordinance in front of us to make it illegal to dump trash in dumpsters that don't belong to you, and we had some Boy Scouts down here. And one of the Boy Scouts came down and said, "That's the dumbest ordinance I've ever heard." He said, "If I'm walking down the alley and I pick up a piece of litter and I put it in the dumpster, then you've made it illegal for me." And he was right. And the then city attorney at that time raised his hand and he said, "I can assure you that my office would never prosecute." But what that is the reason I give that example is it's difficult to come up with an ordinance that handles every single situation in the way that we want it to. I think that the staff has made a pretty good effort to do this, and frankly, I think the council has contributed pretty well to that effort. I am going to propose an amendment here because I have a concern in one section, and I'm going to talk about another section that I have a concern with. But I think that there truly are some administrative processes that belong at the administrative level. We want to make sure that the public is involved in the decisions of government that they should rightfully be involved in, but we also don't want to clog up the process so much so that nobody can get anything done. And that's sometimes a delicate balance. I think we're trying to achieve that here. So having said that, I will move to amend Section 1194C, which is on line 229, to change from at least one lot to, say, all lots.
We have a motion to amend. The motion is to amend Section 1194C, which is near line 229, from at least one lot to, say, all lots?
Yes, which really means two lots, because the most that can happen on an administrative change is two lots. And I think the purpose of it here is for a minor change that isn't going to affect the neighborhood, that is easy to accomplish, that doesn't require a great deal of engineering work and things like this. And if they don't abut a dedicated street, you either have to have a dedicated street or you have to come up with an easement or something else like that, which in that case complicates the issue and really can involve the neighbors and how they get access to it. So, and I'm glad that Mr. Fitzgerald brought that to our attention.
Do we have a second?
Not yet.
I have a second yet.
I was
I think
plaintively
we're all
urging a
still
second.
looking here.
I second.
We have a second.
I seconded.
On the amendment, though.
Oh, not the amendment. Can we ask the, I know, sorry.
Go ahead.
Can we ask the Community Development Director to respond to that amendment?
A second on the amendment. You're welcome.
Just in order to get some input from, if she sees any issues with that. One of the things I was thinking, if the lot is divided, I guess you could say horizontally, and so there's the front, that would be abutting a street, and then the back does not.
Yeah, I can't see your
So
hands.
if the front, here's the street, and here's the lot, and you divide it there, then this one is not. You keep teasing.
So is this
Oh,
one
my
of the ones you, so we have we have Jocelyn here, and I think it was one of the drawings that you put up, if I recall.
So like a flag or something.
You know, as you're having so thank you, Council, for the conversation and asking me to provide input on that. I believe as we were working through it in one of the later study sessions that we had, we were trying to make sure in the cases where we might have a duplex that generally is one lot being divided into to two for purposes of one structure with a common wall, common wall is just to keep that in mind. However, I don't think this is a huge change, so I think it's fine to make that amendment. But I think that was the intent relative to duplex lots.
So you're saying you don't see a problem with the amendment?
I don't think it's that critical of an issue, and I agree we wouldn't want to unintentionally make anything that would perhaps change the neighborhood. So to be more intentional around that, to just make sure that doesn't happen, I think this is a fine amendment.
Could I ask, Jocelyn, what about situations where there may be adjoining lots and one of them doesn't have street frontage and they want to combine that into the one that does?
Well, that would still work.
But if we say both of them have to have a dedicated and must abut a dedicated and accepted city street, then that would preclude subdivision exemption being used to that, which really kind of cleans up those two lots. And that's really kind of the intent of the whole thing.
So probably what it should say is all resultant lots.
Yeah, maybe that's a better way, instead of requiring it to be two. Yeah, good point, Bill. So if it was one or two lots, that the resulting number would have to have access to a dedicated city street.
Does that change your motion then?
It does.
I will move to amend my amendment to change it to all resulting lots.
Agree.
Agree with that. I'll second that. Yeah.
Jerry was the original second, so he's seconding it
Oh,
also.
come on, it was my idea.
So, additional discussion.
Do we need
Thank
to
you,
slow
Jocelyn.
down for a second?
Okay, let's get it restated if we could. You got it?
Let me see that. Okay, Councilmember Clark moved to amend the main motion. Councilmember Valdez seconded to amend 11-9-4, parent C, change at least one lot to all resulting lots.
Yes.
And if it was possible for a third, Bill, of course, would be credited.
So we have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? This is on the amendment. Ready to vote on the amendment?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
This brings us back to the main motion, and we have a motion and a second on the main motion. Is there any additional discussion?
I do have one other item, and this concern has actually come up with multiple people, and that is we have a requirement here that there be adequate utilities. And I'm trying to find the section here. And the concern is what the definition of adequate utilities. Line 228.
That's where we were.
Yeah. And I'm not going to make a motion to amend it right now because I don't know, I can't come up with a sufficient definition that gets what we're trying to do. But I do have a concern about how this is interpreted. So my preference is to go forward with this and then have the Jocelyn and your group think about this some more, and if you can come up with something, bring it back to us. Or if I can hear suggestions from the public, then I'll call you and we can see if we can come up with something on it. But
Can we put this possibly in the form of a question to Jocelyn? Because my question, or Ken, on this one, which is we do have some homes in Littleton that are not on a sewer system, that actually are on a septic tank or a field approach. So this, since it talks about a sewer system, does that mean here those would be precluded from being included, or are those going to be treated special?
Okay, so here's how I would interpret this, and I think Mark would agree with me. 228 and 229 says must have adequate water and sanitary sewer facilities. We have regulations in the city today on what would be required for new construction for water and for sanitary sewer. If a minor lot adjustment was made under this new language, these lots would have to meet the requirement that every other new construction, similar new construction, would meet for adequate water and sewer. So I would think if you had one of those exceptions that did not have a connection to sanitary sewer and they wanted to divide it into 2 lots and have them that way, we would probably say no. There's another process. It would be a more public process in front of Council and Planning Commission, and you would get to make that policy decision whether you wanted to let another lot come into existence that did not have a connection to sanitary sewer in that example. Mark, do you think I described that accurately?
Yeah, I think the challenge for Public Works has been, quite honestly, we don't have a real firm definition of what's adequate public, water and sewer. There has been staff interpretation of over time about how to apply that. And quite honestly, a septic system is probably one of the better examples on an adequate sanitary sewer. Staff would not allow an exemption, or in this particular case, an administrative plat process to move forward if it was on a septic. There are health department regulations that would require, proximity to a sewer that you'd have to address it at that point in time. So we believe that it's, from a Public Works historical perspective, that, again, the desire is to sewer through our sanitary sewer utility all lots, and we therefore would not approve an administrative process for a septic system. I think on the water side, that's been, at least our practice has been, is if Denver Water specifically issues a certificate to serve, then we say that would be adequate. So I think it's probably fine for us. I appreciate maybe the council question. We do not have necessarily an administrative regulation that kind of explains our process. So maybe it is appropriate for us to spend a little bit of time and kind of review this and develop some kind of an interpretive regulation that would help process this.
So back to Councilmember Clark, if I could.
I think the concern is that if there's a sewer line in the middle of the street, then obviously they're going to have to trench out to the sewer. So adequate's going to require a trenching. I think the concern was trenching out and connecting to an existing sewer line is one thing. Completely replacing an existing sewer line because it's not large enough to handle the new flow that's coming is a different thing. But we have lot size limitations on here that I think will help limit what the concerns are with that issue. So I think that's the threshold, is how much work is happening in the public streets or wherever the sewer is that's connected. But we're talking 2 lots. We have the maximum size and the minimum size of the lots combining together, plus an acreage for lots on PD plans. So it may be that we're covered on this, but it's probably worth a little more thought.
I would agree. Just, I think from a Public Works perspective, I think I would like to step back and see if there is an opportunity to kind of confirm our understanding of this.
So at this time, we don't have an amendment. We just have discussion. Is there any additional discussion?
I have a question. On our code, do we have a glossary, overall overarching glossary of terms? If so, is adequate included in that? I mean, if it may be in some instances something like this where there's an opportunity to go back to the glossary and get more clarification.
I can answer that one. There is no definition within the glossary of our code that addresses what adequate water or sanitary sewer. That was probably one of the first things we looked at here some time ago trying to address this issue. So again, it's been a historical interpretation.
Jocelyn? Is that?
I would agree with Mark. The thing that I would add is that we can go back and look at that and look at best practices and what are some of those definitions that we might want to pull from to see if there's more clarity we can add to this section.
Okay, thank you. Did we vote on my amended amendment?
Yes.
We did, we made it.
Well, they amended
you're
your
good.
amendment to be your amended.
But have we voted on the
Yeah,
amendment?
yours was voted on and passed. So your amendment is in.
With
Good, I guess I'm not keeping up.
So now we're back to the main
voted.
motion. We're back to the main motion.
But it passed, right?
yes, it passed.
Just a little jump.
Glad you could join us.
It's a little jump in the time
He's just thrown off
continuum.
because it was a 7-0.
That's right.
So Doug, you've brought the topic up.
Okay. I'm not proposing an amendment here, I'm just expressing a concern, and I'm trying to illustrate to the public and the staff of what the issues are, and I think it may be covered by the sizes, but it may not be. But if we go back and look at it, then maybe we can come up with something. But my preference would be to move forward with this as it is. I think we're better off adding these criteria into the subdivision regulation, which we think is actually going to protect the integrity of the public process, than we are not doing it and leaving it the way it is, which is confusing in its interpretation until we get something better. So I'd rather pass this and then come back and modify this if we have to than to not do something.
So that was discussion on the main motion, which has been made and seconded. Is there additional discussion? With that, are you ready to vote?
I am, I think.
No additional discussion.
The vote is 6 in favor with Councilmember Cole voting no. The motion carries 6-1.
Yeah, remind Doug, we just voted.
Thanks.
So this brings us to agenda item 7B, which is ordinance 25-2017. That's an ordinance on second reading for industrial wastewater pretreatment code revisions. And the information that I have is that staff has found out that because the EPA failed to properly advertise something, that we can't act on it today. And it's just an administrative requirement for us to schedule it to a future meeting, which the next one I think would be July
18th.
July 18th was
Mr. Chairman, I move to continue the second reading and public hearing amending the city's wastewater utility ordinance regarding the industrial pretreatment program to July 18, 2017 at 6:30 p.m.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are we ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Wendy, I'll save this until July 18th. You don't need to make another copy.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe you'll have read it.
To remember that one.
Memorized.
This brings us to agenda item C, which is ordinance 07-2017, an ordinance on second reading for addendums to wastewater connectors agreement addendums and sewer service agreement addendums with connecting sanitation districts. This is, again, a topic that we've talked about previously at a study session. Is there any interest in having a staff member come forward at this point?
Don't we have to postpone this if we just postpone the other?
Mr. Mayor, if I may, we do have a staff member from the wastewater treatment plant, Dan DeLauder, who's here to maybe address some of those questions.
Hi, Dan DeLauder. I'm the Environmental Compliance Manager at the Littleton Englewood Wastewater Plant. Good evening, Council. So the connector addendums were not part of the requirement to go to public notice for EPA. So really, it's the municipal code component, which is what was submitted to them for the public notice.
But aren't they referring back to, I mean, are we changing the connector agreements to refer back to the new amended code? Or am I missing that?
I believe that they're structured so that it's when it's approved.
Okay, I mean, my concern was if we're amending the agreements to incorporate or take into account the new code, but we haven't passed the code yet. Then we're sort of in a code purgatory.
So I see our city
Well,
attorney.
it's a little bit the other way around. So the amended agreements basically just delegate the authority to implement the pretreatment program.
Okay. But we don't have a pretreatment program newly defined or redefined until
We're just changing it.
July 18th.
Right, but we do have a pretreatment program.
Okay.
So just clarity, we have an existing program, we're going to modify it in the future. These addendums apply to our existing program, and a modification in the future would be so the process-wise, we're not doing one before the other inappropriately.
Right.
But your question basically, Doug?
Yeah, that was it.
Okay. Yes.
I have a question, Dan. Earlier this year, and this one isn't necessarily exactly on this, but it has to do with connectors in general with the various different districts. And, there was a question with regard Valley and, what the situation was there and whether, because of deterioration and the lack of maintenance on that, whether there was going to be the potential for an explosion. Do we know what I know this is meant to help us in taking a look at the total system, but do we know the status of the various different districts and where they are with regard their quality and maintenance schedules?
So I know very little about that.
Okay.
My knowledge is
unfair
limited,
question.
I guess.
Okay, I'll withdraw.
Yeah.
Other questions? I'm not seeing any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
That would complete any presentation by staff, and it would bring us to the point of doing a public hearing. Public hearing is open at 7:42, and I don't have anybody signed up on that list. Is there anybody who wanted to speak to the issue at a public hearing? And I'm not seeing anybody. So we'll close the public hearing at 7:42 in a few seconds further. And let me.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve an ordinance on second reading for addendums to wastewater connectors agreements and sewer service agreements with connecting sanitation districts.
Second.
Brings us with a motion and a second and an opportunity for any further discussion. I'm not seeing any. Ready to vote.
The vote is 6 in favor, with Councilmember Clark voting no. The motion carries 6-1.
This brings us to agenda item D, which is ordinance 09-2017. It's an ordinance on second reading to amend the city's zoning code, Title 10, with respect to commercial mobile radio service and to expand the city's regulations to include wireless communications facilities. This is the one that I mentioned earlier, that the city attorney had been working with our staff and also staff with affected organizations. And although it was scheduled today, there might be a reason to delay it to a future date. City Attorney Feldman.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. We discussed this a little bit on first reading. Councilmember Cole had a number of suggestions she wanted to provide to me, which she has. I mentioned that we had been contacted by AT&T, and I've had an opportunity to speak at some length on 2 occasions with a representative of their company, and as you saw from a memo from me last night, make some additional proposed edits. We learned late afternoon today that AT&T would really like another opportunity to meet with me and meet with Jocelyn and talk about some of the areas where, at least at this point, we disagree with their analysis of what the governing law says and what needs to be in the code. The real issue at the end of the day is, would it impact the city's legal rights in any way to continue for 2 weeks? It wouldn't. There's a new state law that goes into effect July 1st. I would like to have this ordinance on the books before July 1st. But while it was a little frustrating as to how this unfolded about the request for yet a third discussion about the changes AT&T would like to make, they will be impacted more than others with this new code, and Jocelyn and I are prepared to meet with them next week if the council sees fit to continue this matter until I think it's June 6th is the next meeting. So we offer that for your consideration.
And so that's actually 3 weeks, gives you 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to table consideration of this ordinance on second reading, amending the city's zoning code, Title 10, with respect to commercial mobile radio service, and to expand the city's regulations to include wireless communication facilities to June 6, 2017.
Second.
If I could ask for a minor clarification, could we change the word table to continue?
To continue, sure. Second, do you accept that?
Yes.
So we have a motion and a second to move this, and we're using the word continue.
We'll
continue to June 6th for second reading and public hearing. Any further discussion? Ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
This brings us to agenda item 8, which is general business. We had one item, agenda item A. It's ID 17-155. This is a motion to approve a city manager contract. And just to refresh memories, at our meeting on May 2nd, it was agreed to move forward with negotiating a contract with Mr. Ralph. This was done, and the city attorney prepared the contract, and there was a copy provided to us. And so the motion would be to approve that contract, and there's a suggested motion on the communication.
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
What I'd like to do is call Mr. Ralph to the podium and ask him a few questions. I think the sequencing would be better. I'm not necessarily in favor of where we are in the process, but believe a few questions to him, giving him a chance to expound on some items that we may have asked in an interview process would be something good and healthy, at least recognizing I was in the minority last time in trying to say what the process would be and looking to complete that. If Mark is amenable.
I think it's appropriate to ask some questions, and that's what we do on these. And so as a staff member, I think it's appropriate also for him to answer. There'll be a limit eventually. We're not going to do the complete process, but I think asking questions would work.
And I realize I may not be the only one with some questions on this, and if I forget at some point in time, I would also like to offer Mr. Ralph the opportunity to ask council questions if I forget that at a later point in time. Mark, there's only really been a couple of public comments that you've made with regard this position that you're being considered for. One is that you would consider it if offered, and that you really want this job. Share with us what's the basis of your interest in our city manager position, and since you've been on again, off again, on again, off again, or maybe off again, on again sequencing, how has your interest changed over this interim period?
Well, certainly I welcome the opportunity to answer whatever questions the council may have. And certainly I am honored for this position here, if the council would consider me for that. And I am excited about the opportunity here as being the city manager for this organization, for this community. You know, I think certainly in my process a couple of years ago when I was being interviewed here for the Public Works Director position, you know, some of you actually even participated in that process. And I shared with you kind of my desire to come to a community like Littleton, this size. And some of this is, you know, now I've been here a couple of years, is even more obvious. But, you know, it's the right size in a fantastic location. Being this close to the metro area provides opportunities that are just unique. The assets that we have with our downtown, obviously the South Platte River, all of that is just, the amenities are just fantastic. You know, I think it's an opportunity for myself to be part of a community, an organization to actually influence and make change. It's not too big to have an opportunity for that. And that's important to me. It was important 2 years ago. It's important today. Beyond that, and why specifically kind of the city manager position. You know, I think it's for a couple of reasons, and just indulge me here a little bit, because it touches on a couple of issues, one being leadership. You know, I think it's an opportunity for me to kind of use my skills, my experience when it comes to the issue of leadership. And I kind of view leadership in kind of multiple different phases. And I think those who have really been successful over time in the position with leadership realize that you're going to have to change your position over time depending on the circumstances. So there's points in time when, you know, you have to be kind of out in front, to be visible, to walk the talk so that people can see you. That's the visible leader. And I kind of like to use the analogy of George Washington crossing the Potomac on front of the boat. You know, that was by design, to be seen. There's also a very important part of leadership where you are, in essence, in the back of the boat, where you inspire others to act. You know, and we've all read probably, multiple books on the issue of leadership, and to me it's a fascinating issue. The ones that really kind of strike home with me are quite honestly the examples of rather large adventures, Lewis and Clark, Ernest Shackleton, or even JFK on the moon launch. And to me, what really rings true when it comes to that level of leadership, it has to do with a vision, an inspired vision. In the case of Lewis and Clark, those who are history nuts, Thomas Jefferson and his vision and being able to inspire Lewis and Clark and that crew to go on that adventure. And to me, it's really about inspiring others to act. And I believe that's even LBJ, I guess, even touched on that in some of his papers, specifically on the issue of leadership. You know, and I think that's the interest that I have, and is to work with the council, to work with the community, to work within this organization, to actually create the vision. And, you know, every one of you here just recently in the council's retreat touched on the issue of needing a vision. I've been part of organizations who actually have taken that on. And it provides a compass here for not only the council, but for the organization and the community, one that we can lean on. And that vision can translate into all sorts of actions here, but it's the structure behind it. So certainly working with the council to create that vision, I have an interest in that. Ultimately, then, it's putting together the plan, being able to execute the plan, to kind of measure our progress, to report on that progress, adjust if necessary. It's that discipline, quite honestly, of adding the structure. That's another one of my strengths, I would say. I've had, you know, over my career, some very interesting projects that I've had to take on. I've had to work within the communities in pretty fascinating issues that required public votes. And so I think it's that vision, creating the plan, and executing it, that excites me. That's the asset I believe that I can bring to the city of Littleton. And I can do that not only externally, but internally to the organization.
Mark, taking you possibly to something a little more mundane, but coming to your point with both visible items and inspire. The proposed contract that we've seen includes provision for you, if you are so chosen as the city manager, to have your permanent residence outside of the city of Littleton. Mm-hmm. As you know, the city of Littleton is our home, our neighborhoods, our businesses. We have a byline that is by Littleton. In taking a look at what you might be looking to do in leading by example, how do you reconcile that and say that that will be a benefit to the city?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And no doubt that's a challenge for probably all of council in trying to decide whether or not you're going to allow a city manager to live outside of the city. I certainly can appreciate the reasons why, just as you articulated. The fact that you want somebody to not only lead the organization, to be part of the community, you know, to kind of witness what happens, to kind of live with the decisions that they make. I understand that. You know, I think in my particular case, I am not in a position to actually move here in the near term. You know, at some point in time, and in the agreement it states that if I ever do sell, then I certainly would move here to the city of Littleton. I don't think anybody should doubt my dedication to this organization and to this community. When I dedicate myself to any effort, I'm all in. And so whether I live in the city or I live outside of the city, quite honestly, it's not going to necessarily influence my dedication. But in the end, I understand why that can be very important to a city council and to any community, just to have the city manager there.
Recognizing the city is experiencing some staff turnover, or at least vacant positions, describe your general approach to employee development, motivation, discipline, recruiting, selection, succession planning, knowledge management. I'm sure you can touch on all of those.
I was going to say, if I got another hour here, I can probably touch on all those. But, I think that's the other part of this, being the city manager, that truly excites me. And that is to actually manage, to lead the organizational development issue here for this organization. Clearly, we're in a period of time where that needs to be reinvigorated, assessed. And I think for me, it starts with, and I've even shared this with many of the employees already, is that to me, one of my primary tenets here is citizen satisfaction. But it starts with employee satisfaction. We can't achieve that citizen level if internally within the organization we're not in a position to support those goals. I've been part of multiple organizations, but one in particular who understood this. I was a key part of how we would address the employee morale, how we would, quite honestly, address all those issues. And it starts with, in my opinion, an employee satisfaction survey, detailed. And that there's a commitment to the organization where you take the results of such a survey, you develop a plan, you execute the plan. I think I even shared this with many of you before. In my experience in Shoreline, Washington, it was the largest city in the metro area that was not unionized. And the reason for that, quite honestly, was the level of effort that internally that organization spent on organizational development and employee satisfaction. I think that's quite honestly essential here in how we manage not only just the recruitment, retainage, and attracting, but it's also obviously retaining our employees. One of the things that I've learned when it comes down to kind of this assessment of kind of the existing staff is really an understanding first at the management capabilities that we have with our existing staff and the level of communication. In fact, I've already started some work internally here with Jocelyn Mills in Community Development, where we've hired somebody to come in and actually begin a process that actually involves the staff at the very front line to provide, anonymously at first, but certainly comments to help us understand the struggles that they have. That you take this information, the management team now for community development and public works engineering, and we've actually spent the time as a group walking through collectively, first as management, and then with all employees to understand kind of the issues that they face with, and then collectively decide realistically what are the priorities and how are we going to manage this issue over time. And that's the level of effort that I'm used to. That's certainly what I've seen in other cities. That's what excites me. That's where I've seen success. That's lasting change, is the involvement of the staff at that level and a commitment by management to see that through. And quite honestly, it starts with the city manager. You are not going to make progress on this issue unless the city manager leads that first.
How are we doing on time, Phil?
That's my last question anyway. Mark, talk about in your professional career what have been greatest successes and greatest failures. What have you learned from those that you're going to apply here in Littleton going forward?
Well, let's see, failures first. I think, probably for me, one of the lessons tough lesson I learned was hiring staff. and feeling like I was in a position where the pressure of the workload just dictated that I make a decision. And so, quite honestly, I've hired some pretty key staff where I regretted that action, where I knew that I just felt like I was filling a position. You know, that was probably 20 years ago. I have never repeated that since. That was a tough lesson to learn. Now, all employment decisions are not necessarily highly successful. I would say that so far in my tenure here, I'd say I've done pretty well, if I may say so myself. And I have a couple of positions that, quite honestly, I'm pretty proud of, one of which is our traffic engineer. You know, again, we haven't had that position probably in 9 years, but I have felt like and I have seen in Aaron Human, I'm be very specific here about some traits. That's the kind of employee that I want. That's the kind of manager that I want. I can see that, you know, that's the person that ultimately over time that I would like to kind of foster that kind of skills, traits, and dedication. Okay, now, you know, I've been involved, quite honestly, in some pretty amazing projects in my career. And I would put that up against any public works director in this country, to be honest. And one of which was first in my time with the city of Grand Junction, where I led, and this was my issue for 10 years, was to lead the Riverside Parkway concept in the very beginning of trying to put some kind of a loop highway around the downtown area of Grand Junction. Extremely controversial in the beginning of that period, because obviously the downtown was concerned about the bypass of traffic. You know, through, I would say, a rather concerted effort to actually engage the citizens kind of upfront in the beginning of this issue to help kind of define the problem. While it took 10 years, it eventually led to a public vote and was at the time the largest single public works project municipally funded entirely by a city. Successful, approved by, if I remember correctly, a 60% approval rate. I'm very proud of what we were able to accomplish. Many people are obviously involved in that, but I think, again, it's an example where in my goals, one of my primary goals here is citizen engagement and how we approach this. It is involving them in the very beginning in the definition of the opportunity to the problem. It's not trying to convince them of the answer. Proved to be successful for the Riverside Parkway. Probably the other most fascinating project I've ever been involved with was when I was hired at the City of Shoreline to specifically negotiate with the City of Seattle the purchase of their water utility and to create for the very first time a potable water utility for the City of Shoreline. I spent 5 years negotiating that agreement here with the City of Seattle. I put together a pro forma to actually create the city's very first potable water utility. And this is everything from buildings, utility billing systems, the staff, the equipment. The city had nothing. That actually went to a public vote. Again, the same basic principle of engaging the community in the beginning of the issue so they make sure they understood the opportunity and the problem. And this was during the recession where the citizens of the City of Shoreline agreed that they would incur debt for the creation of this water utility. Again, the approval rating was over 60%. So it's not just the technical issues that I believe I've had an amount of success with. It's really the public engagement and the approach with this. And that's the piece that, quite honestly, I'm most excited about. That's what I enjoy. Now, I've had other technical failures, I have to admit, as an engineer, where I would look at some issues on street design and the like and come back later and say, that actually wasn't perhaps the best idea. And I'll give you some examples. When I was with the City of Grand Junction, we built some of the first roundabouts in the state. I'm very proud of that effort, but I have to admit the very first one wasn't necessarily the best design. And so I learned a lot from that, and also public process, to be honest. I still am a big fan of roundabouts in the proper conditions, but learned a big lesson there too.
Did any other council members have a question?
I don't, but I'm ready to make a motion.
I had a question.
Oh, sir, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Too, and I didn't realize this was going to happen. I just have two. One of the most important jobs council does is the budget. And we're only as good as our ability to keep the city in the black. And we have challenges that come down the line that are part economic, part cultural. How do we keep the Littleton culture at the same time that we're faced by outward forces of economic growth and change and cultural changes and such? Your background is in public works, and the experiences you've described are public works oriented, which is perfectly understandable. How would you develop the expertise to lead us and lead the city in challenging the economic issues that we have coming down the pike?
Yeah, I think actually that's a great question. And, certainly the council's heard from me here in the past couple of years about kind of the financial status that we have within our capital fund. Obviously that's my expertise when it comes to public works. I've certainly been involved from a financial standpoint in not just capital, but the actual operation and maintenance of utilities, very complex utilities. So I believe I do have a pretty strong financial background when it comes to kind of analyzing such issues. But now you have to step back and ask the question of our challenge here in Littleton when it comes to kind of the whole economic development strategy. I think, many of us talked about this here recently. In fact, I think it came up in our retreat here a few weeks ago as kind of the changing face of retail. This is a significant issue across this country. I don't know. I do not have personally the expertise in understanding that issue. That is quite honestly going to be one of our challenges, is how do we actually embrace this issue? Those, in my opinion, those cities who are going to succeed here in the long run are going to understand this issue and want to take it on sooner rather than later. So the question about how you do that, I think there's certainly kind of a technical expertise that, in fact, we've already engaged at a staff level trying to understand that. In fact, when we come back and talk with you and your council priorities, quite honestly, this issue is going to come up again. So I think there is kind of a technical piece to that, but I think it's back to kind of this broader citizen engagement issue here. And it's really trying to define the problem here collectively with our citizens. And again, it's not trying to convince them of the answer, but this is one, in my opinion, where we need to lay out this challenge for our citizens and come up with a strategy about how we're going to engage this here. Yeah, there could be certainly some short-term strategies that we could do here when it comes to kind of land use, zoning, those kinds of issues. But believe me, in my opinion, I believe we have a longer-term challenge when it comes to this issue and understanding how that could affect us in the longer term.
My other question is, in the last year, we've had a lot of departures of department heads.
Yes.
You've been acting city manager through that, and I heard you say that you've got an employee satisfaction plan that you'd like to implement and to get on top of that. What do we do in the short run? I mean, what's causing these departures, and what can we do? What is your plan to stop that in the short run before you can get an employee satisfaction plan? Is great, but that's a long-term solution, and we're kind of running out of department heads.
Fair question. Yeah, obviously what I described with a kind of an employee satisfaction is probably a longer-term issue there. I think that I do have a strategy about the department directors, but I didn't want to be too presumptuous, quite honestly, and share that until after this evening. So I do have kind of a strategy about how we're going to address that here in the very short term. Quite honestly, I think it is an effort here where we're going to have to start communicating a little more clearly to our staff. My assessment right now is that we have actually a fantastic amount of dedicated employees in this organization. I do believe we're a little siloed. Quite honestly, I think that we're discovering that here in our discussions here between Jocelyn and I and our own staffs at the Public Works and Community Development level. I think that's been eye-opening for us. I don't think it's just limited to those departments. I do think there's kind of a broader issue about how we try to engage kind of the staff and communication here much sooner than that. And quite honestly, one of the ideas that I've actually raised in this discussion here at Community Development and Public Works Engineering is I'd like to have once a month a meeting for all the staff to come in here to this chamber and for myself and the department directors to give them an update on where we're at with specific issues and let them ask questions. I've been part of organizations who have done that. It's very deliberate. There's actually an agenda. In many ways, I would be using kind of that strategy long-term as, kind of to share with them the strategy and the plan here for employee satisfaction. So that's something that I will do, but in the very short term, quite honestly, that has a lot of power. I'll give you an example. About a week ago, I got a phone call from an employee who was retired and was asked to come back and fill in. That employee was only interested if I was going to be the city manager. And the reason why he said that is because of the conversation that's happening right now within the departments of community development and public works engineering. The amount of feedback that I've gotten, that Jocelyn has received, extremely positive. That's what needs to happen. That level of conversation, quite honestly, has been missing. So that level of communication needs to happen immediately. So that's part of my strategy, quite honestly, of helping people understand where we're at.
Do we have any other council questions? Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the appointment of Mark Ralph as city manager and authorize Mayor Bruce Beckman to execute the contract between Mark Ralph and the city of Littleton.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion?
Yes.
Please.
Bruce, it says that you're going to be presenting on this. However, our prior instructions were that Waters was going to be the ones negotiating this contract. I don't see Waters here to be able to address some of those questions on items that are included in the contract. We did receive an email from Chuck, but I could not open his attachment. And I asked him to resend that, and I just checked a little while ago. I have not yet received that, so.
Yeah, I haven't had any discussions in the negotiations at all. As you know, he was ill, but then he jumped right back in to do the negotiations. My understanding is that he used the information that was developed by the city to base benefits and salaries, but beyond that, I can't add anything more than that.
So my question is, Mark, are you ready to sign the contract tonight?
Yes, I am prepared to sign the contract tonight.
Okay.
Bill's got some more.
What I wanted to say is, at times, as we've gone through this interview process, council has expressed a preference for someone that had experience as a city manager. Mark, in looking at his resume, does not have that experience. And looking at the contract itself and the compensation level, I consider it very rich for someone that does not have city manager experience. And in addition to that, one of my concerns is probably less so, but if we do make some adjustments in how Littleton Fire and Rescue is organized, the city employment base, not the city employments, this number of city employees makes that job smaller as well.
So I do have an observation. I'm not quite sure what in the world Mark's been doing for the last 10 months, is it? However many months it is, if he's not been city manager. You don't just get in there and keep a seat warm or cool it off or do whatever. You have to be doing stuff. So whether it's the typical experience or not, stepping into that role, it seems to me he's had his feet dancing pretty good doing what a city manager has to do.
Additional discussion, please.
Well, This, I think I've come to somewhat the conclusion that this is somewhat a foregone conclusion. But, so I'll share a few comments. I agree with Phil. I think that the compensation is incredibly rich, given the fact that his experience as a city manager is at the 10 to 10 and a half months. The ranges that they've used here are based on ranges throughout the Denver Boulder market, with city managers ranging with, a lot more years of service, also serving much larger communities, handling much larger staffs, much larger budgets. All of those things help to determine what the value of that job is, and hence the pay. I think that given the benefit package that's been included in here and the pay increase, it is 20% over what we were paying a city manager 10 months ago, and I'm having trouble coming to terms with where that 10 months has justified a 20% increase. I also I've never liked a car allowance. I think it's just ridiculous. I think it's just a way to add additional $6,000 or $7,000 to an annual income and call it a car allowance. But I didn't like it when we paid it to the other city manager, and I don't like this one. I'm not sure why we still do that. This, based on what you pay for mileage, this would equate to about 1,000 miles a month, and I would expect that the city manager would spend a little bit more time in the city than that. I also have a bit of a, we didn't have a competitive process, and one of the things that came back from our search firm was that they were struggling getting candidates because of our charter severance package, which was a couple of months' pay, and that was not acceptable to the majority of them. So we did discuss with them trying to find another way to help with that compensation, and we came up with this $457 deferred, and we put it in the brochure. So I kind of feel like that was something that we decided to do based on the fact that we were competing in a very large pool, very large arena for good candidates for city manager. We have since thrown away the notebook of the candidates that we received on the second round, have decided not to interview any of these. Therefore, the pool that we used to be, the carrots that we used to be somewhat more competitive are, I think applying those in this instance is I have a real concern with that. I also have a concern on the contract, obviously regarding where the residency. I've always been a vehement supporter of the city manager living in the city. I find it interesting when we had the previous city manager had a situation that he asked for a year's grace period on that. We actually had a number of citizens came down and were pretty vehement in their objection to that. We even had a council member make a motion to penalize him a month's salary for off of his longevity because he lived out of the city for a year. So I'm concerned that that's become a complete non-issue at this point. I haven't changed the reasons why I think it's important. I think those were voiced earlier also. I have a real issue with the fact that we have included in this contract that if the city manager decides, if Mark Ralph decides that he wants to move to Littleton, that we will pay him $10,000 moving expenses or relocation expenses equal to whatever the receipts are, which it would be up to $10,000 to do so. I frankly would feel more comfortable if we removed that from this contract. I think that if the city manager decides that he wants to move to Littleton, then he should move to Littleton. We paid Mark $5,000 when we moved him from his previous job to Colorado, and he decided to locate his residence outside of Littleton. In fact, it's nearly 35 miles from Littleton. I respect your decision. I'm not questioning why you did, where you moved, and all of that. For me, this is very important. So I also find that I'm continue to struggle with the fact that we had no formal competitive process, we had no public process, we had no process where the employees, the directors were allowed to work through this, be it with Mark or additional candidates. And so I don't support at all the process that we've used. And I also, based on the fact that I didn't realize we were going to have a little mini job interview tonight, I didn't prepare any questions, but 30 minutes of a few questions is not enough for me either. I will not be supporting this contract. It is not a signal or a sign of my intentions to not work with the city manager to support his greatest success. His success is our success, is the city's success, but I will not support this contract for all the reasons I've just stated. And I primarily wanted to state that for the record. I also have additional concerns during my 10 months of working with Mark that caused me concern regarding issues with him as a city manager, and those are issues I will deal with Mark privately and directly. I believe that's the most appropriate and professional way to handle those, but for the public comment, I wanted to include my other comments this evening.
Councilmember Valdez.
Thank you, Mayor. Part of this process has been collecting resumes, and we have collected nearly 70 resumes, or plus or minus, I believe it was nearly 80. The last go-round, we went 2 go-rounds. The last one we had about 35. So to think that people didn't want to apply for the job, I sure didn't see that, because there was a lot of interest in both go-rounds. The first go-round, it was limited. It was reduced to 10 final candidates we reviewed, something like that. And then we took it down even below that, and we weren't thrilled with any of them. Although they were good, we just didn't want to hire them as city manager. Second go around, where we got about another 35 resumes from people that wanted to come here and be the city manager. Again, it was the same process. I think after 20 resumes, they got it down to about another 10 where we looked at. And I don't think we were still that happy with what we were looking for. The whole process for me, during the whole process, I have liked Mark. He has demonstrated for me his ability to lead the city. What I do like about hiring Mark Ralph now as a city manager is that he knows some of our issues that are coming up in the very near future, whether it be urban renewal, the code changes. Mark has demonstrated his leadership. I haven't had anyone come to me in the city to say that you guys got to rethink this, having Mark. I've heard just the opposite. I think many of the citizens have had an opportunity to get to know Mark a little bit. I realize there are some that aren't happy with the way the process is coming down to, or what it is at this point, and I can understand that position, that's for sure. I also know what I'm getting into by hiring Mark Ralph as our city manager. Again, he's demonstrated for me the ability to do it for the last 10 or more months. I also think that Mark Ralph and our incoming city attorney are going to complement each other, and they are really going to be a great team for our city. As far as staff turnover and the department heads and stuff, I've been involved with the city for, a long time, over 20 years now. And one thing's for sure, that every department head, I believe every head has changed at least once. I'm talking accounting, public works, HR, assistant city manager, chief of police, chief of the fire department, the economic development director we had at the times. And those have turned more than once. So the idea to think that we have this great turnover, I just don't see that. It's just natural Turnover happens. Other cities are looking for city managers. Centennial's, for one of our neighbors. Inglewood has one that's been there a few years now. They also have a new city attorney. I mean, turnover is happening everywhere. Our previous HR director had mentioned that's what people do today. They go and they work somewhere 4 or 5 years. And lo and behold, our HR director, he was one of them that took it, and I wish him success. And I think our new one will be as good also. Some things I am willing to consider or talk about is the car allowance, as well as the moving expense, and perhaps I can even do some discussion on the salary level. I do support hiring Mark.
Councilmember Clark is the only one who hasn't had an opportunity to talk. Would you like to make a comment or a motion?
We already have the motion.
You have the motion? Okay. We have a motion and a second. We have a motion and a second. That was the discussion.
So I do have an observation. There is an error in the contract, as in one thing is in there twice. That's number 13.2 and number 13.6. 13.2 has the second sentence in that is the same as 13.6. So I at least like the duplication eliminated. If I have to make a motion, I will, but I think it's just an editing.
Let's ask the city attorney if that's just a grammatical or non-substantive change.
Councilmember Cole is correct. There's a duplication, and we can edit out that sentence in one of those two paragraphs. So it only appears once. That's a minor. I'd consider that.
If we delete it in the first instance, then we don't have to change the numbering in the others.
That was my thought, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
The motion and a second. Do we have? Are we ready to vote? Oh, yes. We have it. One. Are we going to go around again?
I haven't gone yet.
Would you like to go?
So, the motion at the last council meeting was to negotiate a contract in that past, and that was the charge. My problem is there was no negotiation. Everything in this contract was in a January memo that went from I believe our HR department, and Ken Feldman, our acting city attorney, and virtually every piece of that is in here, and it didn't go through rigor. Obviously, if the applicant was paid once to move to Colorado and he chose not to live in Littleton, why should we pay him again to move from the place he chose to live down to Littleton? It doesn't make sense to me to pay somebody to move twice because they may want to move again. I think that's an oversight, and I'm disappointed it's in there. I think the process has been flawed all the way through that, and this is a good example of it. My understanding, and I'm probably the only person who is not on this council who has not been through a city manager hiring, or at least I know that I haven't been, but my understanding is that these would go back and forth a little bit. A contract would be offered. There was some negotiation in there and an opportunity to go through these. So this contract isn't ready for prime time, in my opinion. The salary issue is, in addition to not being an informed public process, which bothers me a lot, the salary is extraordinary to me. I called the Colorado Municipal League this morning, and I got they have a survey of towns in Colorado and what their city manager salaries and total compensation packages are. And I took 12 cities that range from 19,000 to 86,000 in population, and I have copies of this, so I'll be glad to pass it. So cities Littleton size, the range of compensation packages is from a low of 172,000 to a high of 250,000, or I'm sorry, a low of 166,000 to roughly 250. The average was $196,000 for city managers in our size cities. For the total compensation value. The package we're offering Mr. Ralph is $212,000. That's a lot of money difference. And my issue is that Mark has exhibited a lot of good qualities, and I think Mark's going to get this job. I fully support Mark. I want him to do the best he can because his victory is our victory. But you don't go out and hire somebody with 1 year of city manager experience and pay him above the average at the upper end of the tier. This is the very top end of the tier. And I just don't think that Littleton, it's in our best interest or in our citizens' best interest to do that. He needs to earn that money by showing that as a fully in charge city manager, he can do the things he eloquently stated that he wants to do. I have faith that Mark can do that, but I'm not willing to start him at a top-end salary. Where do we go from there? Also, Littleton has a history of shooting for mid-level salaries, and here we are $16,000 above the average for cities our size, according to Colorado Municipal League. And I know the information that Mr. Feldman gave us from Mountain States Employee Council was a, what do they call it, a weighted or an aged average, which means it's older data and they inflate it forward to today. The data in the Mountain States survey that, or not Mountain States, the data in the CML survey that I was able to obtain this morning was gathered between January and April of this year. So it's very current data. And we're way above the curve on that. So I will support Mark's candidacy, but not with the salary level, not with the moving expense. And I really think this needs to be negotiated rather than just picked off a January memo.
What was that average that you said, 166? Is that what it was?
The average was for all the 12 cities is 196.
Total compensation.
196,000 total compensation, and we're offering a package of 212.
Did you have salary by chance?
The average salaries, I have the column, the average salary was 175, and we're offering 188.
Yeah, thanks, I appreciate it.
So do they have the median and the median salary and also the populations of each of those?
They do, and it's all, I have the populations, and I'm going to pass this out. They had minimum, maximum, and more information, but I frankly didn't have time to do that because I just came across this today.
Thank you.
No, I do want to speak.
Councilmember Clark.
Okay. Chuck came to us multiple times and asked us what our compensation was going to be because he needed to know that to go out and recruit city managers because that's what they were going to say. I mean, that's what they were going to ask. The memo that Bill refers to is something that came to council that we had a chance to comment on that went back to Eric, and with the decision of council on what we're going to offer people. I'm in sticker shock at what the amount is, but that may be a reflection of my age and the market rather than anything else. And frankly, that's a decision that we all made when we started this process. And it was a decision that we made when we continued the process. It's pretty hard to go out and recruit city managers if you're not going to tell them what the salary range is, what the compensation level is, all that stuff. So what we have back is basically a contract that reflects what the council decided during our process back in January and February, because after we went through the first group of candidates, I believe we went back and did another re-up on this, on what we were going to put, because the Waters and Company put out a new brochure. My feeling is if we're going to offer a package, we need to offer the same package to candidates rather than getting a candidate and deciding that we want to adjust something because of various conditions. If during the process of doing our annual evaluations, we find that the compensation level has moved up or down, then we can adjust that as appropriate. I have been, and I think some of you were in those city manager interviews where the survey actually had the median range of the city manager salary going down, which was a shock to everybody. We've had a city manager that went through multiple years with no raises for various reasons. Some of it was related to circumstances and making a statement. Then it became a time of having a salary, but the salary range had gone down. So there's a number of things that I don't particularly like in the contract, but to be competitive, that's what we decided to do, and this is the discussion that we had when we set out in the search. So I think that it's appropriate for us to continue with the decisions that we made before. If we find out in the future years that the compensation is now out of line with what other cities our size get, then that's another issue. But whoever it is that we pick to do the comparison is the group that we should stay with to do the comparison. If we don't like the money that comes out of the comparison, then it's a little strange to be then complaining about what the comparison methodology is. And this is true not just with city manager, but true with all employee positions.
Okay, are we going to go around it twice?
Doug's commented twice, so.
Bill?
Yes, my recollection of the earlier discussions with Chuck was we had a range, and it would be an it depends. Someone who had 10 years experience as a city manager, maybe they come in at the median, maybe they come in at the midpoint. Okay, it was not one number, it was a range. And that was the discussion that we did have, or at least I had with Chuck. So I would like to make a motion to make 2 adjustments. So to amend the contract to be offered to a base salary of $175,000 and eliminate the moving allowance.
Second.
We have a motion to amend the base salary to $175,000 and eliminate the moving allowance. We have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Ready to vote?
Just one comment.
Okay.
Go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say, I think, Doug, our memory of the memo and that information that came out in January, it's a little bit of a distortion to say we all agreed to that. That was to provide it does as information. I don't think we ever voted on that. We never said, yeah, this is what we'll pay. And every piece of that got dropped into there. It's like the entire menu of choices, a car allowance, a moving allowance, which he's already been paid once. I mean, somebody, and Mark would, would admit to that, that he already got paid a moving allowance once. Why would we do that again? It's a carelessly drawn up contract that was not negotiated. So to call that January memo a representation of something that was agreed to by council, we all saw it, but had no consideration of who the candidate was. We hadn't even had our first round of interviews yet. So we didn't know what the playing field was. And obviously you adjust pay based on who your candidate is. You try to negotiate the best deal to get a great employee that's going to serve the citizens well, but at a reasonable price. And I don't believe the contract reflects that, and that's why I support Phil, but I don't think we all agreed to that menu of opportunities.
So I do have a question. isn't Littleton's population now estimated to be about 45,000?
Yes, and I noticed that on here, and I don't know how old that data is. I can only assume that all the population data was taken at about the same time and probably not updated. But Littleton's, it moves at one spot difference in the range. It doesn't affect the mathematical salary data.
But I was looking at the one city that is 45,000. And, you know, even if this is somewhat aged information, that seems to me more relevant.
Parker is nearly 80,000 at the moment.
Yes, but the data was when they were 45,000.
No, the data was this, between January and April of this year, and their total compensation is 180,000 or 194,000 compared to our 212 offer. And the other city at 45,000 is Commerce City, and they're at 180,000 on total compensation.
Well,
So we're
I'm
significantly
looking at the salary, not the total comp. So, you know, and I must be looking at something wrong.
And Parker's mayor nearly has 10 years' experience. Or city manager, excuse me.
So what you're saying is the data that's in the sheet that you gave us is inaccurate?
Oh.
No.
Some of the population. But.
What?
I mean,
I said the populations may not be accurate, Doug. Don't go that route. Don't try to look at this.
Okay, hold on. Hold on.
No,
This is a debate, and there's
it is a
different
debate,
opinions.
sir, and I'm debating.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that the compensation numbers were gathered this spring. So don't take population data that may be a year or two old or several years old. I don't know what it is, but the relative size of these cities has not changed. It's not even significant. So it is 12 cities that are in a size range from 19 to 86,000. So that's a pretty good range.
Except for Mount Rose and Fountain, they're all fund
But the total compensation value is what I'm talking about, and that's what the Colorado Municipal League has gathered and relies on in their analysis.
Because the salary is probably more accurate than the population, that's for sure. I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Additional discussion. Are we ready to vote? This is on the amendment to change the base salary to $175,000 and eliminate the moving allowance of $10,000.
Wait a minute, so say that again, little more.
This is Phil's amendment to change the base to $175,000 and to eliminate the moving allowance of $10,000.
The vote is 4 in favor, with Councilmember Cole, Councilmember Clark, and Councilmember Mayor Beckman voting no. The motion carries 4-3.
Okay, so this brings us back to the original motion and a changed contract. So, City Attorney, talk to me about any issues with changing the contract as far as producing it as a document to present now forward for consideration by the candidate.
Well, you had a motion that has passed to change a material term, two material terms of the contract. I have no idea whether the other proposed party to that contract accepts that. It frankly is kind of rare to negotiate a contract from the council dais. So you can vote on the main motion and the council can authorize the mayor to sign that contract, but I suspect you're not going to find out until after the meeting as to whether anybody else is going to sign that contract.
So is it possible to take a 5 or 8 minute or 10-minute break just to...
I'll tell you the problem we have is we have some guests for the study session too. So we have some people waiting.
How about a 5-minute?
I move that we have a recess for 10 minutes.
Okay.
I could use a bathroom break.
Okay, we'll take a quick recess. We're going to have to take a recess anyway. It's time. It's usually we do it at 8:30, so.
Recess it is.
Recess it is. Let's do about 10 minutes. And that'll give our technician also a chance to begin to prepare. Okay, we're back in session after a brief recess. We are on item 8A. This is the motion to approve the city manager contract. We just had an amendment that was approved. And that amendment was to change on the contract the base $175,000 and to eliminate the moving allowance of $10,000. That brings us back to the original motion, which was made and seconded. Unless there's additional discussion, I'd like to move that to a vote. Additional discussion.
So I have a question. If the amendment was approved, does that not de facto take the place of now voting on the original?
No. No, what it does is, and the attorney can correct this, but it just basically changes the wording in the contract that you are approving, but it's going to require, my position is that unless it short circuits itself along the way, the suggested contract will go back to Chuck Rohr for additional negotiation unless someone was to decide that it wasn't necessary.
Okay, so state that again for the record, what your understanding is.
Council is approving the contract. Our agreement with the company is to do the negotiation. We've just changed the terms of what we're willing to accept. It's going to have to go back, in my opinion, to the company to negotiate this as a position of us as the hiring entity that we contracted that company to negotiate.
I'd ask the city attorney a question because my interpretation might be a little bit different, that what we're saying is we're authorizing the mayor to sign the contract, and that will be the offer.
That is what the motion says.
Yeah.
You're authorizing the mayor to sign the contract with these terms, and the amendment was to change two of the numerous terms in the contract. So you have a contract. If the council approves it, that basically means one of the two parties to the contract have approved it. Theoretically, if you want to play this out, if Mark says that doesn't work for me, then it might at some point go back to Chuck to do further negotiations or not. All you're acting on tonight in this motion is what the council is authorized, the terms of the contract that the council is willing to have the mayor sign.
Yep. And authorizing the mayor to sign the contract if it turns out to be agreeable.
Right. So it could be one-sided signature once it leaves here. It moves forward, and I think the go-between by contract is Mr. Rohr unless it doesn't need to go there. Because he is our negotiator.
Let me put it this way. I think, given the very public nature of this discussion, there's no need for a go-between. I think Mark knows what's in the contract. So I would suggest, I didn't mean that to be flippant, I'm sorry. I mean no disrespect. I think what would happen next is, and I don't think it will happen tonight, I think Mark is going to have to decide what his reaction is going to be. And based upon his reaction, if further discussion is necessary, I do believe the council has previously authorized Mr. Rohr to negotiate with Mark. So at some point, might we get back to that activity? Yes.
So we do have to go ahead and vote now again?
Yes.
Okay.
So are we ready to vote on the amended contract?
The vote is 6 in favor, with Mayor Pro Tem Brinkman voting no. The motion carries 6-1.
Okay, so we are on a little bit of a time crunch. This brings us to agenda item 9, which is usually comments and reports by the city manager, council. And we have a study session that we need to do. We're a little bit behind what we thought we would be as far as timing goes. Would council be willing to forego the reports? I'm getting a yes.
Big, long one I wanted to do tonight.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to have to take a short break for technology change. We're going to move to the community room. We'll come back on the air as soon as the technology can be as quickly as possible.
But we're adjourning this meeting.
And we are adjourning the regular meeting at 8:59.